agreed to, and I call the honourable member for Dunkley.
Thank you. This Liberal government has never seen a group of vulnerable people that it didn't want to target. It's a government in search of a policy agenda. It's a government in search of a reason for being. But it's never in search of a group of Australians to target, and it's always, always vulnerable Australians that it sets its sights on. This bill targets pensioners. It targets young people looking for work. It targets older workers who have lost their jobs. It targets people at a time in their life when they need assistance, not punishment. It targets people who have worked hard, who have paid their taxes, who want to go and see their family who live overseas, or perhaps support sick family members who live overseas. It targets hard-working, vulnerable Australians at their time of need. And if you feel like you've seen this Liberal government trying to make these cuts before, if you feel a little bit of deja vu, it's because you have seen this before. These cuts to pensioners and to people who need allowances were bad when the then Treasurer, now the Prime Minister, announced them in the 2016-17 MYEFO. They were bad when he put them in the 2017-18 budget. They were bad when they were introduced into the parliament in 2017 in the ironically titled Payment Integrity Bill. And they're bad now. They're bad now. At least the 2017 Liberal government was apparently too embarrassed to bring a bill ripping $185 million from the pockets of Australian pensioners on for debate. It introduced it, but it didn't bring it on for debate. But not so the Morrison government. Oh no, this Morrison government, apparently not at all ashamed to try to bring in more cuts to vulnerable Australians, more cuts to middle-aged and older Australian workers, more cuts to New Start, more cuts to pensioners. Not at all ashamed by their legislation which would make life even harder for Australians who are already doing it tough. So here we are debating the ironically called Payment Integrity Bill, and you might ask yourself if everyone in this chamber understands what the word integrity actually means, particularly those on the other side. Here we are debating it, and Labor is opposing it, because this is legislation which would make it even harder for Australians who are already doing it tough to get by and would punish Australians simply for wanting to live their lives. Australia has the slowest growth in a decade. We have stagnant wages, productivity is in decline, we have record household debt, high underemployment and declining living standards. And what does this Morrison government have as a plan to address the floundering economy? To make life just that little bit easier for people in my community of Dunkley who are struggling to pay the bills on their low wages, whose businesses are finding it difficult to find customers who have enough disposable income to spend, who are working out right now how they're going to pay their out-of-pocket costs for their health care, the aged care costs for their parents and their loved ones, how they're going to pay for childcare so they can go back to work, how they're going to find stable, secure and well-paid employment. What does the Morrison government have as a plan for people in my community? Nothing. But they do have this bill, an old, bad idea to rip money from the pockets of pensioners and those looking for work. They have a plan to make it worse, not better. This bill cuts New Start. Be in no illusions about that. It will force Australians who are trying desperately to re-enter the workforce to eat into their savings, into their meagre savings, before they can access income support. I am deeply concerned about how this government's attempts to make people who have lost their job expend their meagre savings and assets before they can access New Start or sickness allowance, how this will impact older workers in my community in Dunkley. As I go around my community when I'm not in Canberra, when I'm at home every day, when I'm out there holding seniors' morning teas for 650 people in a week, when I'm talking to people in the local mall and the shopping centres in Langwarrin and Coringal, when I'm at the shopping strips in Carrum Downs, Frankston North, Monterey, when I'm holding community drop-in clinics at the community centres, at Orwell, at Belvedere, I am constantly faced with stories of men and women in their 50s and older who simply cannot find work. Sometimes it's their parents who are approaching me, who are saying, I'm retired, I should be enjoying my life, and I'm spending my days worried sick for my daughter, for my son, who's 55, who's worked their entire life, who's been made redundant, not through any fault of their own, but has been made redundant after they've paid their taxes, done the right thing, because the business has gone out of business, because of the changing nature of work means that the job they're doing is no longer needed. Sometimes because they've lost their job and they can't get back into the market because of age discrimination. I get told about people who in desperation have taken their age off their CV and managed to get interviews, but then for some reason don't quite ever get the job when people find out how old they are. It's a real problem. And sometimes it's simply because the economy is floundering and there just isn't enough work for everyone who wants it. They might get a job, but they certainly wouldn't get enough hours, and it's not secure. I meet every day across my electorate of Dunkley people who want to work, people who need to work to support themselves and their families, people who have taken course after course to try to reskill, to try to upskill, to try to get themselves in a position where they can find a job. People who need a federal government who will back them in, not one which attacks them with cuts to allowances. And of course, we know that this is an issue across Australia. We know that middle-aged and older Australians who are re-entering the workforce find it particularly difficult, not just in my community, and it's because of those structural barriers to finding a job and the age discrimination that we know exists. And we know, again, that it's not just in Dunkley that older workers will need to retrain and to upskill and to spend more time on further education, which, if you're lucky enough to live in Victoria and you want to do one of the courses that the Labor state government has made free, you can do at TAFE. But for too many Australians, many Australians across the country, that further education costs money, often money that they don't have. The number of Australians over the age of 55 on Newstart has skyrocketed by 45% under the Liberal National Government. Over 55s represent the largest cohort, or over a quarter of all Newstart recipients. And this bill attacks those very people, make no doubt about it. Because currently people claiming Newstart, sickness allowance and youth allowance, because young people aren't left out of this list of vulnerable Australians who are attacked, and Austudy, have to wait up to 13 weeks to access the payments if they have liquid assets, which are, for example, savings or a redundancy payment, over $5,500 for a single with no dependents, or $11,000 for someone with a partner or dependents. Hardly enormous sums of money. The existing waiting period at these levels is a week and increases up to a maximum of 13 weeks for liquid assets of $11,500 for singles or $23,000 for those with dependents. What does this government want to do? It wants to extend the maximum liquid asset waiting period from 13 weeks to 26 weeks for people with liquid assets of more than $18,000 for singles or $36,000 for couples and people with dependents. Again, hardly staggering amounts of money, particularly when you're talking about having to pay unaffordable rents, rising electricity costs, childcare costs, healthcare costs, education costs, let alone putting food on the table. But it's not just cash in the bank, of course, that liquid assets are made up of. So the government's own department says that some payments made or due to be made by a person's last employer, including redundancies that haven't been made, amounts deposited or lent to banks or other financial institutions, whether or not you can access it immediately, assets given to a son or a daughter in some circumstances, loans to other people and compensation payments are included in the liquid assets test. This bill means that applicants will need to spend down more of their assets before becoming eligible to receive a payment. And as many of my colleagues on this side of the House have said before me, this is just mean. It is mean-spirited. It will not help anyone to find a job. It does nothing to help people find a job. There is no rationale for increasing the liquid asset waiting period for people who lose their jobs or who are made redundant, No rationale other than a cash grab. No rationale other than taking money out of the pockets of workers just when they need their savings the most. The current waiting period of up to 13 weeks is long enough. Some people find another job in 13 weeks. But it is really important that those who don't aren't forced to run down their savings to the point where they become vulnerable to losing their home. They're not able to meet unexpected expenses. They can't do the things that they need to do to keep on looking for a job. They have to spend their time wondering how they're going to feed themselves, feed their family, pay their rent, as well as trying to stay strong when day after day they're putting in job applications and not getting jobs. When day after day they're going to work but they can't get enough hours. They have to be on Newstart because their job isn't enough for them to survive. We need people to be able to concentrate on how to get a job, how to help themselves to get qualified to get a better job, not being made vulnerable to unexpected expenses, unaffordable housing, and simply just not knowing how they're going to get by day to day. That financial buffer is really important. It is really important. And this bill just wants to erode it. This government just wants to erode it. How can it be the case that we can have a government that wants to have more people in a position where they've eroded all of their savings and they get put on Newstart and they're expected to live on $40 a day? The current rate of Newstart is not enough to live on, and it is not enough to support people looking for work. It is time to raise the rate of Newstart. This government should be raising the rate, not cutting Newstart. I recently sat down with volunteers from St Vincent de Paul conferences from across my electorate of Dunkley. They asked me to support their call to raise the rate, and I support them, absolutely. St Vincent de Paul conferences across Dunkley have assisted almost 10,000 people over 12 months. 10,000 people over 12 months in my electorate, 5,500 adults and 4,000 children with food, household assistance and other assistance totalling $360,000. These are good people volunteering and putting their hands in their own pocket to help vulnerable people. And they came to my electorate office in Frankston to tell me that they are seeing that the number of people on Newstart who urgently need assistance to supplement the current meagre rate is on the increase. And they are desperately worried for how they're going to be able to continue to help those people and everyone else who needs help. St Vincent de Paul, like ACOS, like the Business Council of Australia, like social welfare and business groups across our country, are calling on the government to increase the rate of Newstart. And they are right to do so, and it is time to do so. Because it's not just unemployed people that are needing Newstart, it's also underemployed. 1.1 million Australians, more than 1.1 million Australians are underemployed. Over 130,000 Newstart recipients actually have a job. They just don't earn enough or receive enough hours to escape having the payment. Employers are receiving an average of 19 applications per vacancy advertised. And to our shame, there are 3 million, or 1 in 8 Australians who live in poverty. 1 in 6 children, or 750,000, live in poverty. At a time when Australians are doing it tough, when the economy is weak and getting weaker, these cuts to the pension and cuts to Newstart are not only cruel and vindictive, they are reckless. And the name of this bill is so ironic. How dare a government that bought us robo-debt try to talk about payment integrity? My constituent Graham Howarth from Carrum Downs called my electorate office last month about an age pension robo-debt of nearly $7,000, and Centrelink wouldn't help him, gave him the runaround, didn't know where the debt came from, so he started to pay it back. We told him, well, in order to get your robo-debt looked into, you have to put in a formal appeal. Call the robo-debt appeal line. He did, and lo and behold, Centrelink have cancelled the debt and are refunding the amount he's been already repaid. because it's toxic, it's flawed, the government has had to admit it. It's time to completely scrap robo-debt, and it's time to actually look after vulnerable Australians instead of targeting them.
I thank the member for Dunkley.